Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We're going to be speaking about one of the things that is so important to the idea of creating a better world, which is the notion of spiritualizing politics, making it conscious, making it conscientious as well. And in order to address this subject, we have invited on today the author of this book, Sacred America, Sacred World, Stephen Dinan. Stephen is very well known for his work in the Shift Network, and it's a worldwide organization which is educating people online in massive ways about such important subjects having to do with human values, spirituality, consciousness, neuroscience, you name it, they cover it at the Shift Network. And one of the subjects that's become very dear to Stephen's heart over the past number of years is the subject of sacred politics, which, as you know, is something that I talk about routinely here. And yet, I'm especially pleased to have Stephen here to talk about it sort of as a collaboration, as a peer-to-peer conversation, which I always so appreciate. So, Stephen.
Thank you for the warm introduction and for having me, and thank you also for your work in creating a better world, which is tireless.
It is. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. It makes for full days. I'll put
Yes,
it that way.
indeed.
It's a lot of work, but and of course, all of us. I say that tongue in cheek. We're all very much involved in this effort. Our community at large. We're very pinpointed on that idea. I just happen to have captured that phrase that everybody is sort of, working toward. So, listen, this book is very interesting. I love your weaving together the higher values that we feel as human beings into a place which is sort of a bit of a dark pit and has got a horrible reputation. Talk a little bit about what you want your readers to gather from the book.
Well, first of all, I think it's important that we relate to our country in a sacred way, that we don't just get disillusioned and judgmental and say politics is broken, and so we go off and we try to create our better world in little communities and networks of allies, because essentially what it does is it defers decision-making to people who don't always have our best interests at heart, and it's really going to compromise our ability to create a better world in the long run. So I believe there's really no pathway to a better planet that doesn't go through a new and improved politics for America, since we have such an outsized influence on the global stage. I mean, we have 37% of the world's military, 22% of the world's economy. We have so much influence in technology, and so it's really important that we get our act together.
Yes.
And part of that is we have
the rest of the world really looks to us for leadership.
Yeah, for leadership. And so leadership means being the change that we want to say, and that means to create a democracy we can be proud of, and one that really fulfills the deeper principles that were instilled in this country from the beginning. And at every stage of our development, we've always had areas where we're falling short of those ideals. We had slavery. Women didn't have the vote. We still have racism. We still have corruption of different forms. And so we're always trying to create a more perfect union out of the messy business of daily life. So I think it's important that we, first of all, we're honest about the shadows and the corruption but we don't stop there, that we go deeper, that we actually touch into the sacred core of what this country is all about. The principles like liberty, equality, and justice for all are very high and noble principles.
Yes.
And the motto itself, e pluribus unum, out of many one, it's leading us towards more oneness. And that's where the spiritual conversation and the political conversation converge, because to lead towards greater wholeness or more oneness or greater unity requires us to ground and center ourselves in something larger than our separate personalities. It has to be a higher sense of purpose, higher sense of values, higher sense of meaning, a real vision for where we're going as a country. And so that I think that we need to, part of what we do in the book, we go deeper into the roots and really show the sacred roots of our country, this higher mission embedded in our very DNA, and also how do we shift the landscape now so that we make politics less toxic and less polarizing, less antagonizing, so that it actually expresses more of the best in us and invites in more people who are the kind of leaders that we most admire and respect. And I think that the truth is,
what office are you going to run for?
I personally don't. People do ask me that, and I'm not. I think it's great to get people to run for office, and I encourage it, and I have supported several friends. I have gotten clear that my task in this lifetime isn't to run myself, but I do want to be influential, and I want to help to redeem, I think, the noble purpose of politics, which is it requires some deep thinking and a lot of care to design systems and policies that help create a healthy society. So in many ways, it should be the place where we pour the most intelligence and the most wisdom and the most of our heart and care into our political process, because that has the biggest impact on the most lives. And so
that's such an important point. I think first of Lao Tzu, just because I love Chinese food. No, I'm kidding. It's because I'm essentially Taoist in nature.
Oh, nice.
And then that's just has to do with my relationship to nature, actually. And he is like the spokesperson, of course, in his poetry. But a lot of what he wrote about is governance. It's really about government. But first, it's about self-governance.
Right. You can't have the second ladder without the first.
Exactly. And so that's the point I'm sort of raising. So I'm listening to everything you say and all of the broken aspects of our system. And I'm thinking the reason that it is broken is because we're broken. Because if it doesn't have integrity, it's because we don't have integrity. And so ultimately, politics is just a bunch of people making decisions on behalf of others.
Right.
And at base, it's supposed to be a deep, sacred vow for public service, for working for the public good. So we're wholly aligned on this. So my question, Stephen, is how do we go from where we are into fixing the people who aspire toward public service or toward self-interest? How do we work that narrative?
Well, on the personal level, I think it's really important that we look at and work with the polarizations in our own heart. So where are we casting people out? Where are we demonizing them? Where are we diminishing their sense of potential as well? And it's very common because so much of the media reinforces that. So we get a narrow and more negative view of whoever doesn't think like us. And so I think I have a concept called political cross-training, that I want to see political orientations as sort of like we see different sports, that if you do different sports, you actually can enhance your ability in one sport because it's going to train you in different ways. And so as part of the book, I've
muscle groups.
Yeah, it's different muscle groups. And so you think of in many ways, different value systems have become crystallized in terms of political ideologies. But if for the larger good of the whole, we want to actually be able to integrate all of those and be able to honor them for their place. It was a big journey for me to do this with conservatives. I was a pretty hard left progressive for my younger years, and I used to see conservatives as the problem. We just needed to kind of overthrow them and stop them, and then we could evolve this better world.
Another level of domination.
Right, another level of domination. And
kind
of shifting to see that actually political diversity is part of our strength, and we need to be able to create a unity at the core of certain values, certain principles of engagement, certain ways that we actually embrace that we are all fellow citizens, all fellow members of this planet. And that's the ground where we can then engage the different perspectives on how do we organize our affairs and make our decisions and what's important. And for me, I've realized over time is that hard left stance actually compromised my ability to be a leader in different ways. And over time, I did some cross-training, and the joke around our house was I needed to integrate my inner Republican in order to create the Shift Network. And I actively sought mentorship with Republican, like particularly my wife's father, who is a Republican businessman. And I invited him.
Your father-in-law.
Right. I invited him to mentor me in business because I realized that he had certain skills and certain capacities that I hadn't built as much, being more in the kind of new paradigm, left kind of progressive circles, but there was a certain sobriety about decision making and being able to make more conservative decisions and
some
build
level
capacity.
Of detachment.
And toughness too, like a certain level of toughness. Oftentimes the new paradigm we prioritize heart and love, but not as much toughness, and sometimes that's required to weather storms and setbacks. And so he definitely challenged me in different ways. And so I think if we take that cross-training perspective, is that we want to engage in a way that sort of helps us to grow our skill set and then to embrace others. And so for me, I'll give an example with Sarah Palin. When she was the vice presidential candidate, she really got under my skin. I found myself as close to hating her as I normally ever get with people. So I took it on as a practice. I read both of her books over time. At least
she was nice to look at.
Yeah, I read both of her books over time, and I actually had this rapprochement in my heart with her, and I felt like, even though I don't agree with her politically, I had a dream in which we were friends and hugged, and it was very sweet. And I ended up writing an article called Dissolving the Palin Prejudice, where I really chronicled this shift in myself. And what was interesting is that I got a lot of fan mail from conservatives because they felt like seen and respected in a way they hadn't been. And we forget that when we throw tomatoes and disrespect at a political leader, all the people who see them as an expression of their values and the world they want to see, they take that as a kind of personal insult. And when people feel personally insulted, it creates a schism, and it often freezes things up. So as we've gotten more and more exaggerated about, that's part of why our government gets so frozen up, because there isn't that deeper sense of respect and listening. And so we have to unravel that in our own hearts. And so that's why I went to the Republican National Convention, and I've been on conservative talk radio and conservative stations, because I want to be able to speak in a way.
I think it's very cool.
Yeah.
I really admire that. And if you want to go back to even our, I don't like the phrase new age, but you know what I mean, a certain kind of spiritual perspective, which is also supported by the work of quantum physics, which is the holistic paradigm. It includes both the Republican in this case and the Democrat. So if you're going to be Hegelian about it, you've got to have both polarities in order to create a new synthesis.
And in fact, it's integrating at each level. So there's, like, to bring in the Taoist kind of with the yin-yang symbol, which most people are familiar with, there's an interpenetration of opposites. And so if you reject one of the opposites, you don't actually have a whole system.
And that creates the shadow.
That creates the shadow. So what we really need to do is not to have the Democratic Party win or the Republican Party win. We need both parties to evolve, and then third parties to play their role in that larger evolution. So you want a more enlightened Democratic Party, more enlightened Republican Party.
Let's talk about
that. And that's part of how we create a more sacred America, is that you got to up-level the whole game.
Exactly, up-level the whole thing. Let's talk about third party for a second.
Okay.
And then I want to go into the powers behind the puppets.
Okay.
Okay.
You want to go deep?
Oh yeah, because that's where it's at. It's not about the election at all, and that's what's very dispiriting for people, because they think that their vote means something, and it's not that it means zero, but it doesn't. Well, we'll talk about it. But first of all, third party. Historically, and I think you know this, that there have always been third party and fourth and fifth and sixth all along until about the last 30 years, and still in the last 30, there have been always third parties, but they've been so marginalized by the media. Mm-hmm. And when the League of Women Voters allowed Ross Perot to come in, there were great fireworks. Mm-hmm. And they said, never again. We're not. And then it happened again with Carter, actually, and Gary Anderson. Was his name?
Gary, yeah.
Gary Anderson, I think. I'm not sure, I think. Anyway. They're marginalized. This time, because there's such huge fracturing, it looks like Gary Johnson has just hit the 15%. And Dr. Jill Stein, who I've been rooting for tremendously, and she's been on the show several times, is also gaining in the polls as well. And I would argue that the only reason that she is not at 40% right now, if not more, is because of the media. So if we've always had third parties as serious candidates in our elections over time, why now such a heavy-duty blackout?
It's an interesting question. I sort of maybe step back a little bit. Like I actually, first of all, want to say that I think that solutions aren't necessarily all going to come through third parties. I think that it's like that's where I see a sort of a sacred role for all the different factions, if you will. It's like working within a party structure, like within the Democratic Party or within the Republican Party. I think there's a role for people who are working outside.
Tea Party, for instance?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. And I think that in many ways, Bernie was not a real full-fledged Democrat. He kind of like stepped in to be a Democrat, and then in many ways, he was like a third-party candidate who ran through a major party.
After all, he's been independent for most of his...
Yeah, he's been independent for most of his life. So I think that independence of thinking is good.
But I'm getting where you're going with this.
Yeah.
And I like it.
So because I think we can sometimes think, the solutions... we can get into the system's all broken, we can't fix it, we have to kind of create something fundamentally new on the outside. And I think that can be limiting as a mechanism of change. I think what we want to do is work with the people who are in power. Like, I think that's an important part of politics, and sometimes we take that for granted. It's like whoever's our currently elected representatives, to try to help them do a better job.
Talk to them.
Make relationships with people in their office. We do this with our representatives and senators, to some extent with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which does a lot of great peace lobby work. It's a Quaker-based group, but they open to other non-Quakers.
Nice.
And so we go and do that. And so that's actually part of our democracy, is to not just participate in trying to get people elected who think like us, but to get the people who are elected to be better informed, to have new ideas. Absolutely. And sometimes they're so busy they don't necessarily even know about cool stuff. I'll give you an example. Like, I was at a fundraiser for Gavin Newsom in California, and I said, "Well, what do you know about the Bank of North Dakota?" And he's like, "I've never heard of the Bank of North Dakota." He didn't know that. So, but it's a great example of a public bank.
That's right.
That's
serving
the people, created in a Republican state that's basically serving a lot of infrastructure development needs, and the profits are returned to the people. It's helped to streamline things. It hasn't taken the private banks out of business, but it has improved the system, and it should be something that gets replicated in every state in the country. But most political leaders aren't necessarily hearing about that. So as citizens, we can help people hear about the most innovative things, get connected to new ideas that are emerging, build bridges.
This is such an empowerment model that you're putting out. Do you know the work of Sam Daly Harris?
A little bit, yeah.
Reclaiming our democracy.
And he's also done a lot of work with microfinance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He started working with Muhammad Yunus with that, and then he branched out into this. And he goes around to different organizations. It might be interesting for your Quaker group.
Yeah.
And he teaches people sort of the mechanics of reaching your senator, your congressman, local, state, federal.
It's really important.
And how to, and just as you're saying, educate them, because they usually come into office on sort of like one issue.
Right.
And then he says, it's up to us to educate them about our issues.
Yeah.
And they're oftentimes very willing to listen.
Yeah, surprisingly so. And sometimes it takes some tenacity. When I was at the Democratic National Convention.
Sometimes I think you be too modest.
Yeah, and at the Democratic Convention, I spent some time at the LGBT caucus. And it was remarkable to me that in 1972, there was only one out delegate to the DNC who was out as a gay person. And this year there were 700, and there was 28 who were trans delegates, which sort of blew my mind. I was like, wow, I didn't know that movement had even made that much progress. And there was a parade of different political leaders who came in, and they were really speaking their commitment to have the LGBT communities back and to really support all these issues and to really full equality on all levels. And it was really evident to me, like, the people who had taken the time to run for the local platforms and get on the platform committees and be part of the grassroots part and really build over time. It was a 40-ish year process, but that helped. That was what was required to move the whole societal needle on that movement. And I think the LGBT community has been one of the most successful social movements in recent years, and they've had it's an outside and inside strategy. And so I think, if you think about change, it kind of comes from different directions. There's the outside in strategy. There were a lot of the protest. There's the inside out. There's top down and there's bottom up.
Yeah, right.
And most people will kind of gravitate towards
four quadrants,
one or the other. And part of all of it is, of course, inside out. So you have to do the inner work of shifting. And when you do, and you show up in a different way and build relationships with people, then some different changes can happen. Like when I was at the Republican National Convention, there was a beautiful initiative called the Purple Tent. Stuart Muszynski created this. He was looking at what are the higher values that unite us beyond left and right. Red plus blue equals purple. So purple values, purple tent. And
I came up with that many years ago.
You did? Okay, well, you beat him to it.
I think I did.
But anyway, so I was on a panel.
I want a purple world,
I was on a panel with Grover Norquist, and Grover Norquist and we probably couldn't be further apart ideologically. But I wasn't trying to polarize or argue with him. I was more curious, like understanding his worldview, where things hung up.
Stephen, you are a more evolved being, so you approach this like a Taoist. You're in the middle space.
But I'm not the only one who can do this. The thing in our space, there are
Yeah.
plenty of people who have done the inner work that allows them to do this.
Oh, right.
But a lot of times there's still an ideology. It's like, oh, I'm going to do my spiritual thing and I don't want to engage the political process.
Well, this is
and
a
people need
huge
to understand
issue.
that you can go in there and actually bring our full conscious selves and be more of a unifier, healer, bridge builder, rather than just another person who's exerting force to try to like force change.
Oh, yeah.
And like that's actually helps to soften the system. So right now it's so brittle and the trust is so low that when you can create these personal bridges and help to heal the field. Before we started filming, I mentioned when in Cleveland there was a beautiful initiative. Some nuns in Cleveland had said, they were gearing up for riots in the street, police forces. They was expecting like lockdown in Cleveland for the Republican convention, and they said, we want to do something different. We want to bring a whole different spirit. So they created this circle of the city with love. We ended up having 4,000 people across a bridge, across the Hope Memorial Bridge, and this was a couple like elderly nuns who really got this off the ground.
Yeah.
And it was a great example of how to engage politics in a different way. That's bringing our heart, bringing our soul into it. That helps to kind of soften some of the intense polarization going on, and that opens the door. The police were expecting 1,000 arrests a day, and there were 5. And they said the joke was in the Washington Post that we were expecting riots and we got a block party. So we need to bring more of that spirit into it's a little more of a it's got a Taoist or a keto kind of flow. It's not like hitting somebody harder. It's like learning how to flow with the energies and blend with the energies in the people, so that we're actually helping to evolve consciousness on both sides. I mean,
but now let's look at something. Now
Yeah.
let's just take a step behind the curtain. Okay.
Okay.
Because this is all well and good, and I really appreciate it, and I feel that it actually has a lot of value too. So, not negating it, but looking at the power structure behind the politics, sort of the deep state, the permanent government, which is largely the military-industrial complex and big pharma, insurance, media to some extent at this point too. But these are the real players that watch the revolving door of the elections come and go. The presidents, the vice presidents, the senators, they have and control the big budgets. Then you have someone like the Koch brothers now getting behind Hillary Clinton. Now, they're not doing that because they are feeling democratic. They're doing that because she's going to do their bidding. And their bidding has always been in the domain of not just the Republicans, but the Tea Party. Now, I'm really talking about even deeper than this, and that has to do with what we know of as the kind of the centralized global structure of money and wealth and banking. So how do we reconcile? Now, I believe that the remedy remains even they are just people with families, with wives and husbands, and they have a heart, and there are hearts to be reached. So in a sense, our remedy and solution remains the same. But in your work around this book, and you're out on the lecture circuit now, how do you reconcile that polarity between the power brokers and the politics of a given nation?
It's a complex thing. I mean, because sometimes our strategy is to go to the old, the old revolutionary, overthrow the old power structures, and I think that probably the truth is more going to melt away in many ways. It's not. It's going to be, and that's where, like for instance, there's a lot of distortions in the banking system. We can talk about dissolving the big banks, but then I was like, well, why don't we focus on the public banking alternative? Build that up.
Like North Dakota.
North Dakota, create a Bank of California, Bank of New York. It's like you start to bring in this more affirmative life enhanced credit. So it's like you're building that up. Working on microfinance and credit, it's like that's a strategy to redirect more resources. And so in a way, it's sort of like draining energy slowly away rather than trying to overthrow.
Exactly.
And so
vote with your dollars.
Vote with our dollars. It's like being conscious of what we buy, which companies we support,
what we put into our bodies,
and the whole socially responsible investment movement. All of these things are ways to kind of essentially just drain energy away from some of the really dysfunctional entrenched interests. And into these. And meanwhile, as we heal some of the political dialogue and discourse and create more bridges, we can find reform things that, like for instance, Van Jones and Newt Gingrich are working on Cut 50, which is an initiative to cut prison populations by 50%.
Really?
So yeah, you can do. And
Obama came up with this startling, fantastic thing of canceling out all private prisons on the federal level.
Yeah. So there's definitely shifts,
Things
and
happen.
and momentum gets built from small
I
wins.
should say shift happens.
Yeah, so I think when you talk about big systemic changes and like dismantling old power structures behind power structures, it's like those things are really entrenched, and it's going to happen through kind of a slower process of melting away. And so we find the things that we can agree on, cross, transpartisan initiatives that we can agree on to make progress in a certain area, build bridges, and then it's like, and also evolve our consciousness, and that really starts to shift both sides of a divide. I think Gandhi set a very beautiful example. It wasn't just about overthrowing the British. They had too much power, too much military might, economic. He needed to evolve the British. He needed to awaken the British, and so he taught the Satyagrahas and the Indian people how to engage in a way that enlightened through the principles of nonviolence, for deep respect.
And through modeling.
And through modeling. Even if somebody's clubbing you, you can still love them, which is a hard thing to do. And
look at the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and what they did in Alabama, Selma, etc.
It's hard, but that's what ultimately we have to kind of, even the most corrupted structures, you got to love them into their wholeness too.
Exactly.
But to do it, but with engagement, to do it with our full engagement, bringing all of ourselves, building allies where we didn't necessarily.
But you do contemplate, as a thinker about these subjects, you do think about the internal power structure that governs governance.
Yeah, I mean, it goes deep. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's. I don't go into a lot of those areas in the book because I feel like this book is. It's like you can only go so far down the rabbit hole before you lose people, and so I'm more connected to a lot of those movements, but I don't necessarily showcase, deep space program or things like
as, right, like Foster Gamble and Thrive, like David Icke, like Gary Null. They really go deep. Chris Hedges. There are many who go deep and expose and bring light.
And the challenge is to go deep and expose, but in a way that ultimately is recognizing the divinity in all people, because sometimes it can result in its own really dark polarization that doesn't really serve
Absolutely,
either.
And that's a very important point to make that we'll probably end on, which is that people become entrenched in their point of view so deeply, and instead of love flowing out of them, it's anger, and that just further polarizes the situation. And so, if I may say, one of the things I really appreciate about the book is it's very much, I feel, an olive branch to say, hey guys, let's talk.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful things I heard a couple days ago, someone told me that she's always been a very conscious, progressive activist, had a real schism with her brother-in-law, was very conservative. She read the book, she was underlining all these things, then he read the parts that she underlined, and they ended up having a very healing conversation. So I was like, if I can do that for one family, it's like it starts to ripple out,
So let's keep talking.
Beautiful. Thank you for your deep work.
Thank you, Stephen. Wow, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. The work, Sacred America, Sacred World with Stephen Dinan. Please contact me at mjr@abetterworld.net. Share your thoughts, feelings with me, and suggestions. I really learn a lot from them. And visit us at our website, www.abetterworld.tv. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.